I struggled for years, saving every dollar to finally own my home. Then, my parents stabbed me in the back, accused me of theft, and sued to give my house to my sister. I thought the hardest thing I'd ever done was save for 5 years, sacrificing everything to buy my first home. Turns out the real challenge was defending it from the very people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, my own family. They tried to take my house, my sanctuary, and re-gift it to my sister, all based on a lie. From a very young age, I, Rafaela Burns, learned that love in my family was conditional. My dad, Robert, never had to raise his voice. His words were like a judge's gavel, calm, measured, final. When he spoke, the conversation was over. My mom, Charlotte, played a quieter role, never contradicting him. Instead, she'd translate his authority into this soft, almost kind disappointment that wrapped around every decision, every expectation, making you feel guilty without a single harsh word. And then there was Isabella, my younger sister. She grew up in a completely different household, even though we shared the same roof. Isabella never knew what it felt like to brace yourself before asking for help. She never had to prove she deserved space. Our parents watched her with this constant, almost anxious concern, as if the world might just bruise her if they didn't step in first. I was expected to be capable. Isabella was expected to be protected. Even as a kid, I understood that fairness wasn't a rule in our home. It was a flexible concept, one that bent easily in Isabella's favor. So I learned to rely on myself. By my early 20s, I'd accepted that no one was coming to rescue me. If I wanted freedom, I would have to earn it. I poured myself into work, staying late, fingers stiff, eyes burning as spreadsheets blurred together. I told myself discipline was temporary. Sacrifice was a bridge, not a life sentence. 4-5 grueling years, I saved relentlessly. No spontaneous shopping, no weekend getaways. Lunches packed at home, coffee brewed in my own kitchen. Every bonus, every raise, transferred straight into savings without celebration. Each promotion felt less like success and more like pure survival. With every deposit, I moved one step closer to something I barely let myself want, a place no one else could touch. When I finally told my family I had enough for a down payment, my mother reacted as if I'd announced something monumental. She clapped her hands, eyes lighting up. "Oh, sweetheart, we're so proud of you," she said, already rearranging the dining table, stringing lights like the announcement deserved a ceremony. My father just nodded once. Smart investment if you do it right. For a brief moment, just a flicker, I felt seen. I felt proud. Then Isabella leaned back in her chair, stirring her iced tea slowly. "Must be nice," she drawled, her tone casual but sharp underneath. "Having that kind of salary. Some of us are still paying off grad school." I just smiled the way I always did. "You're doing well at your firm. You'll get there." She didn't respond. She didn't have to. Whenever attention drifted away from her, the air in the room tightened. I'd felt that pressure my entire life, the silent resentment she carried whenever my accomplishments were acknowledged. Still, I kept moving forward. On weekends, I drove through quiet neighborhoods, imagining a life where my choices didn't require anyone's approval. When I found the house, a modest 3-bedroom at the edge of the city, it wasn't perfect. The floors creaked. The paint needed work. But it was peaceful, private, mine. Signing the paperwork felt unreal, like stepping into a version of myself I wasn't sure I was allowed to become. As I held the keys in my hand, I felt something unfamiliar settle into my chest. Ownership. Control. I didn't know then that this house, the one I earned, would expose everything I'd been avoiding about my family. 2 days after moving in, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. I was sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, sweat clinging to my skin. A screwdriver lay forgotten beside me. I almost ignored the call until my best friend Sophie's name flashed on the screen, followed by a message. "You need to see this right now." My stomach tightened. She sent a screenshot. It was from Isabella's social media. Dramatic, emotional, carefully crafted to invite sympathy. When your sister uses the money grandma meant for your first home and buys one for herself instead. Over 200 likes. Comments flooded in. People I didn't recognize were calling me greedy, selfish, heartless. My throat closed as I reread it, hoping I'd misunderstood. There was no inheritance, no fund, no promise, and yet she had told the world otherwise. When I finally got through to my parents, my father answered first. "Hello," he said, his voice flat, distant. "Dad," I said, forcing my voice steady. "We need to talk about the house." "What situation?" My mother's voice called from somewhere in the background. Robert exhaled, sharp and impatient. "Your mother and I have spoken with an attorney," he said. The funds designated for Isabella's future home were meant to go to her. My heart pounded so hard my wrist trembled. "What are you talking about?" I said, "There was never any designated money. I bought this house with my own savings. I can show every deposit." There was a pause. Then he said it. "That house belongs to your sister." I sank onto the nearest step, my legs giving out beneath me. "Dad, this isn't real," I pleaded. "There's no agreement, no fund." "You're making this complicated," he snapped. "Your sister needs it more than you do. She never told me she wanted this house." I cried. "It doesn't matter," he said. "We'll be filing in court tomorrow." My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. My mother finally spoke, her voice heavy with disappointment. "We're only doing what's right by your sister. You can buy another one." Another one. As if 5 years of sacrifice could be repeated without cost. The call ended without goodbye. That night, Sophie came over with takeout and concern etched into her face. My boyfriend Jack stood just behind her, arms folded, jaw tight. "They're trying to take your house," he said quietly. I didn't sleep. By morning, shock had hardened into something sharper, something steadier. I realized then that my parents weren't confused. They had chosen a side and it wasn't mine. Morning came without relief. I sat at the kitchen counter in Sophie's apartment, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long gone cold. The city outside her window was already awake, but everything inside me felt suspended, like time had paused and forgotten to restart. Sophie leaned against the counter, arms folded. "You're not going back there alone," she said. Her tone wasn't angry. It was final. I didn't argue. I didn't have the energy. Jack stood near the doorway, scrolling through his phone, jaw tight. He hadn't slept either. Every few minutes, another notification buzzed. Messages, tags, comments. Isabella's post was spreading. Friends of friends, distant relatives, people who knew nothing about me, all suddenly certain they knew exactly who I was. A thief, a selfish sister, a woman who'd stolen from family. By noon, my phone rang again. This time, I recognized the number. "Rafaela," my father said when I answered, no greeting, no warmth. "Our attorney will be filing today." I closed my eyes. "You're really doing this?" I said, "You're suing me?" "We're protecting what belongs to Isabella," he replied. "If you cooperate, this doesn't have to get ugly." The word cooperate burned. "There was never any money," I said. "You know that." Silence. Then my mother's voice slipped in, soft but cutting. "We don't understand why you're being so difficult." The line went dead. That was the moment fear turned into resolve. Jack slid a folder across the counter toward me. "You're going to need a specialist," he said, "someone who handles property and inheritance disputes." Inside were business cards and notes. One name was circled in pen, Grace Langston. "She's the best I know," Jack added, "and she doesn't scare easily." Grace's office was all glass and clean lines, flooded with natural light that made everything feel sharper, more real. She listened without interrupting as I laid everything out. The savings, the post, my father's declaration, the lawsuit threat. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen once against the desk. "Their claim is weak," she said calmly, But weak cases can still cause damage if they're not handled correctly. I swallowed. What do you need? Everything, she replied. Payment records, bank statements, proof the house was purchased entirely from earned income. I nodded. I have all of it. Good, she paused. Now, who knew the inheritance was divided evenly? My Aunt Victoria, I said, and my Uncle Thomas. Call them, Grace said. Today. Uncle Thomas answered on the second ring. Your grandmother would be furious, he said after I explained. I'll sign whatever you need. Aunt Victoria was quieter, heavier. I always worried this would happen, she said finally. Your father asked your grandparents to change the will to give Isabella more. They refused. The truth began to take shape, piece by piece. This wasn't sudden. This was years in the making. 2 nights later, Sophie insisted on coming with me to grab more of my things from the house. As we pulled onto my street, I saw movement near the porch. Someone was at the door. My heart slammed into my ribs. A figure stood there, jiggling the handle. A key glinted under the porch light. Stop the car, I said. It was Isabella. She jumped when she heard my voice, turning sharply. I just wanted to look around, she said quickly. It's going to be my house anyway. I stared at her, something cold settling in my chest. That key isn't yours, I said. She scoffed. It will be. Grace called it attempted, unauthorized entry. I called it the moment everything crystallized. The fear I'd been carrying hardened into something else, something with teeth. If they wanted a fight, they were going to get one. The courtroom smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper. The air felt heavy, pressing in on my lungs as I walked beside Grace toward our seats. Across the room, my parents sat at the plaintiff's table. My father straightened when he saw me, his expression tightening like he was preparing for battle. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. Isabella stared openly, her gaze sharp with accusation. The judge entered. Rebecca Lawson. Her presence silenced the room instantly. This court is concerned with facts, she said evenly, not feelings. Let's proceed. My parents' attorney opened with confidence. This case concerns a verbal family agreement regarding inheritance distribution, he said, an agreement Miss Burns violated. The phrase verbal agreement made my stomach twist. Grace rose smoothly when it was her turn. There is no documentation, she said. No witnesses, no mention in the legally executed will. Meanwhile, the defendant has provided 5 years of payment records. My father was called first. We always intended to help Isabella with her first home, he testified. Rafaela knew that. I clenched my jaw. My mother followed, her voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. We don't want to hurt Rafaela, she said. We just want to honor what was promised. Isabella took the stand next, smoothing her skirt with shaking hands. I don't earn as much as my sister, she said. I believe the house was meant for me. Then it was our turn. Uncle Thomas spoke clearly. The will was divided evenly. No conditions. Aunt Victoria followed. They refused to change it, she said. They believed in fairness. When I took the stand, my voice didn't shake. I saved for 5 years, I said. Every dollar came from my income. Grace submitted the police report from 2 nights before, the one about Isabella. The plaintiff attempted to enter the defendant's property using a key that was not hers. Isabella went pale. Judge Lawson reviewed the documents in silence. Finally, she spoke. There is no evidence of any financial arrangement assigning funds specifically to Isabella. The purchase was made entirely from the defendant's earnings. She paused. I dismiss the case in its entirety. The gavel struck. The sound echoed like release. In the hallway, my father followed us. This isn't over, he said. We're still family. I turned to face him. You don't sue family over lies, I said. You made your choice. That evening, I stood in my house as the sun dipped below the rooftops, painting the street in soft orange light. For the first time in months, my chest loosened. This house wasn't just mine. My life was too. The courthouse emptied slowly, like a storm draining out of the air. People passed me in small clusters, lawyers murmuring, strangers laughing softly. Life continuing as if nothing monumental had just happened. I stood still for a moment in the hallway, my back against the cool wall, breathing in short, careful breaths as though my body hadn't yet realized it was allowed to relax. Grace touched my arm lightly. "It's over," she said, not triumphant, certain. I nodded, but the word over felt strange, heavy, like something that didn't quite fit yet. Behind us, footsteps echoed faster than the rest. "Rafaela," my father's voice. I turned before Grace could stop me. Robert stood a few feet away, his shoulders squared, his jaw tight in a way I recognized well. That was his control, slipping face. My mother hovered just behind him, fingers twisted together, eyes darting between us, like she was hoping the hallway itself would swallow her whole. Isabella stood a step back, arms crossed, her confidence finally cracked, replaced by something brittle and exposed. "This didn't have to happen," my father said. "You made it public." I let out a slow breath. "No," I replied. "You did when you sued me." He shook his head, sharply. "We were trying to protect our family." I met his eyes fully for the first time since the ruling. You don't protect family by lying about them. You don't protect family by trying to take what they worked for. My mother reached for my hand. "Please," she whispered. "We don't want to fight." I stepped back before she could touch me. "You already did." Isabella's lips trembled. "That house was supposed to be mine," she said quietly, like saying it softly might make it true. I looked at her then, not with anger, not with triumph, but with a clarity that surprised even me. "It never was," I said. "But you were promised things no one had the right to promise you. And instead of asking questions, you decided I was the enemy." For the first time, she had no answer. Grace stepped forward, her voice calm and final. "We're done here." And we were. That evening, I drove home alone. The street looked different than it had weeks ago, calmer, almost unfamiliar. As I pulled into the driveway, the knot that had lived in my chest for months didn't tighten the way it used to. The front door stood exactly where I'd left it, solid and unmoving, no longer feeling like something that could be taken from me with a sentence or a signature. Inside, the house was quiet, not the heavy silence of waiting for something to break, but a peaceful one, a chosen one. I set my keys down on the counter and stood there for a long moment, listening to my own breathing. The refrigerator hummed softly. The floor creaked beneath my feet. Proof that this space existed independently of anyone else's approval. A knock came at the door. Sophie burst in first, arms wide, wrapping me in a hug so tight I laughed despite myself. "You did it," she said into my shoulder. "You actually did it." Jack followed, holding up a bottle of sparkling cider like it was a trophy. "Not many people walk into court against their entire family and walk out standing taller," he said. Grace arrived last, setting her briefcase down with a small, satisfied smile. "Justice doesn't fix everything," she said, "but it gives you room to breathe." Later that night, my phone buzzed. A message from Uncle Thomas. "Your grandparents would be proud." Another from Aunt Victoria. "Fairness matters. Always has." I turned off the phone after that. Standing alone in the living room, I walked slowly from window to window, opening them to let the cool night air in. The city lights glowed softly outside, and for the first time since buying the house, I didn't feel like I had to defend my right to be here. This house wasn't just a purchase anymore. It was a boundary, a declaration, a line that said this far and no further. I finally understood something my grandparents had tried to teach me without ever saying it out loud. Family isn't defined by blood alone. It's defined by who stands beside you when everything collapses and who tries to rewrite your story when you're not looking. That night, as I stood in the doorway of my home, I realized I hadn't just won a case. I had taken back my voice, my limits, my life, and no one was taking that from me again. The days after the ruling felt unreal, like I was walking through my own life with the volume turned down. The lawsuit was over. The judgment was final. And yet, every morning when I woke up in my house, there was a brief moment, just a second, where my body braced for impact, for another call, another accusation, another demand that I give something up. But the phone stayed silent. My parents didn't reach out again. Not with apologies, not with explanations, not even with anger. The absence itself felt like a statement, one last attempt at control through withdrawal. And for the first time in my life, I didn't chase after it. I went back to work. I cooked meals in my own kitchen. I unpacked the last of the boxes I'd been too afraid to touch before, as if settling in fully might tempt fate. Jack stayed over most nights that first week, not because I asked him to, but because he wanted to be there. Some evenings we talked about everything. Other nights, we sat on opposite ends of the couch in comfortable silence, his presence grounding in a way I'd never known growing up. One afternoon, as I was watering the small patch of plants in the backyard, a memory surfaced. Isabella and I as children sitting at the kitchen table, our parents arguing in the next room. I remembered how she used to look at me then, wide-eyed, waiting for me to step in, to translate the world for her. For years, I had done that, absorbed the pressure, softened the consequences, made space for her needs before my own. The lawsuit wasn't the beginning of the rupture. It was the end of my silence. A week later, a letter arrived. No return address. My mother's handwriting. Inside was a single page. We didn't raise you to be so cold. You embarrassed us. Family doesn't turn its back. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. Not as evidence, not as a weapon, but as a reminder. I hadn't turned my back on my family. I had finally turned toward myself. That evening, Sophie came over with takeout, flopping onto the couch like she owned the place. You know, she said between bites, most people don't realize how brave you have to be to stop explaining yourself. I smiled because she was right. The truth no longer needed my defense. Later, as the sun dipped low and painted the walls in soft gold, I stood at my front door and looked out onto the street. The neighborhood felt quieter than it had weeks ago. Not because anything had changed, but because I had. This house no longer felt like something I had to protect. It felt like something that protected me. And in that stillness, I made a promise to myself. I would never again confuse guilt with love. I would never again earn affection by shrinking. And I would never let anyone, family or otherwise, rewrite what I had built. Some stories end with reconciliation. Mine ended with clarity, and that was more than enough.